The Middle Ages, a time when the church ruled and a feudal system of government was set as solidly as the walls that enclosed the cities and castles that protected it. The world, for better or worse, was unchanging, with only wars and rivalries defining the age. Advances in medicine and science were almost non-existent because of the constrictive nature of the medieval system. In 1347, an invasion would lay waste to Europe and change the entire world, cracking the confining walls of the feudal system just enough so that the Middle Ages would come crumbling to its knees. The force of this change originated in Asia and struck with extreme speed and potency. However, it was no invading army of fierce and skilled warriors. It was an army of infected rats and fleas, which carried one of the most destructive diseases known to man. It would be known as the Black Death, and its attack on an ill-prepared Europe would change the course of history forever. There were 4 conditions that had created a Europe that was vulnerable to diseases and on the brink of disaster, almost as if they were the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The first was war, a constant power struggle between nobility, depleting much of the land's resources, destroying homes and families. The second was a cooling climate and excessive rains, leading to poor crop production, weakening the health of the citizens. The third was a quickly growing population that caused an increase of squalor in cities, overtaxing the immune systems of their inhabitants. The fourth was the church, suppressing any advances in science or medicine that could threaten the word of the church, for the church's word gave them their power to maintain a corrupt government. These 4 conditions were what put Europe on the edge of disaster and chaos, mapping the way for the Black Death that was soon to follow. The bubonic plague's only pandemic in Europe will be known as the Black Death. The first sign of the disease was swelling in the lymph glands called buboes. The disease then caused red spots to form in the skin, which later turned black, hence the reason it was called the Black Death. While the bubonic plague may have existed before, the conditions in 1347 were perfect for the bubonic plague to flourish and spread across Europe. It would kill 25 million people in just 5 years and lead to changes that would transform Europe and eventually the world. At this time, Asia was the trading center of the world, and one trade ship on a trip back from the Black Sea had on board a little more than goods. It arrived to its home port of Messina on the island of Sicily in October of 1347. When the ship docked, the Sicilians were shocked to see almost the entire crew dead. By the time they figured out that the boat was a threat to their community, it was already too late, and the plague was free to ravage the island of Sicily. Within weeks, almost all of Sicily was infected with the Black Death, and the entire community was in panic. The nuns and friars attempted to cure the plague victims, but to no avail. People stayed indoors, attempting to escape the plague. Empty houses were the graves for many people infected by the Black Death, not one of them given a proper funeral. The fear of the disease even led parents to leave their infected children to die. Then, from the busy trading city of Messina, the Black Death began to spread across mainland Europe, leaving a dark cloud of fear and depression over the land for many years. No one was untouched by the plague, not even the church, with its supreme influence and power, could defend itself against this invasion. Since no one knew the source of the plague, it was seen as a supernatural force sent by God to punish the unworthy. Many people prayed desperately for forgiveness, while others, like the flagellants, thought they could appease God by whipping themselves until their backs were dripping with blood and their skin torn off by the barbed and knotted ends of their whips. Others believed that the Jewish people were the cause of the plague. Since Jews don't believe in Jesus, Christians believed that God was punishing them for tolerating Judaism in their communities. So they started killing the Jews, believing that once they were gone from their cities, the Black Death would follow suit. While it may have reinforced the belief in Christianity for some, the Black Death diminished it for many. People began to wonder why the plague had killed devout followers of Christianity, who had prayed to be spared, but received no such mercy. Also troubling, was that many priests, the holiest of all people, had died from the plague, along with their faithful followers. People began to look at religion in a different way, and some began to think that perhaps the church wasn't as righteous and blessed as they had believed. The sudden destruction the plague had wrought caused medieval society to disintegrate. With almost every major city losing half of its population, medieval society would no longer be the same. The terror the plague had caused, and the quickness with which it had struck, barely allowed the lords and kings any time to react, and no time to plan. Doctors, believing the plague was the result of breathing in polluted air, told the patients to go somewhere with fresh air, and to stay away from large groups of people. Those who followed the doctor's advice left the city. Still, many of those who left were infected and had just days to live, causing the amount of workers to drop dramatically. Because of the weak workforce, the prices of food began to escalate at alarming rates, with large numbers of people leaving the towns and cities looking to grow their own food. The feudal economy began to collapse. When the events of the Black Death began to die down, near the end of the 1300s, people began demanding more reasonable prices for foods. Citizens blamed the monarchs for their starvation, causing revolts to break out in England, Belgium, France, and Italy, further crippling the feudal economy. Under the feudal system, the king gives land to his lords in exchange for his protection. Peasants work the lord's land in return for food and safety. This system of government was thought to be unbreakable, until the Black Death led to the revolts, which began to crack and weaken the walls of the feudal government. Out of these cracks, new forms of government began to take root, grow, and spread. Through these fractures, the world would be seen with new eyes. These revolutions lifted the restrictive influence of the church and the feudal system, so gradually advances could finally be made in art, science, and medicine, opening the way for the Renaissance, which would eventually lead to what we call our modern world. Science, especially medical science, benefited from the plague greatly. The plague opened Europe's eyes to sanitation and how to improve medicines. Before the pandemic, people left their waste lying in the streets, and it wasn't seen as a threat. No one at the time knew the plague was spread by infected fleas, but the medieval doctors observed that in the bustling, rat-infested towns and cities, the disease spread at a shocking rate. These observations inspired people to use a more scientific approach to solve the questions of the age. Through these developments, people began improving their personal hygiene and started to become more aware of their body and health. Still, it was unknown what the Black Death was or how it was transmitted. The bacterial form of the bubonic plague was discovered by a Swiss man named Alexandre Yersin in 1894. It wasn't until 1898 that a Frenchman named Paul-Louis Simond discovered that the Black Death was transmitted by infected rats and fleas. These discoveries led to cures that would combat the Black Death and to heal those who until that time would have been considered dead men. We have defeated this foe by overcoming it as best we can, and by climbing this great mountain, we as a race have changed because of it. The Black Death took advantage of a weakened Europe, setting the stage for countless advances in the fields of science and economy. The Black Death changed Europe's way of life, opening its eyes to the unfairness of the feudal system and freeing itself from the strangling grip of the medieval church. Europe, and in turn the world, have benefited more from the plague than from any war we have waged, because our goal was our preservation, and not honor or greed. The world has feared the plague and struggled with it for centuries, but we could not be where we are now without it. It paved the way for medical advances, personal hygiene, and sanitation. It took us a step towards democracy and allowed us to have the freedom to create and imagine. Though nothing can diminish our grandest aims, like discovering the mysteries of life or reaching the edge of the galaxy, it seems to always be the little things that take us by surprise.